DSG, thank you for joining us. And I want to start off by this memorial that South Africa will be handing down to Israel. When people listen to this, it'll be the week of the deadline for the memorial. So, in as much as we can talk to government about this issue around the International Court of Justice, and as much as we can talk to government, the Minister of Ronald Lamola and so forth, Similani, but we can't take away the ANC's own responsibility towards this particular case. The ANC, if without the ANC, I think it would not have materialized that we had this case against Israel being submitted in the ICJ. Perhaps take me through what went into the discussions. I would imagine that you had discussions, intense, in-depth, robust discussions around what do you do, seeing what had happened in October 7.
Thank you very much, and thanks for inviting us. The October 7 was a culmination of, the aftermath of the October 7 was a culmination of what we have observed over years and what we have been involved in over years and what we have actually been subjected to over years, and what then triggered a much more robust engagement was that this is a turning point. It's a turning point because we definitely have to look at what we stand for as the ANC. And we resolved that this is beyond just solidarity, but it is about being on the side of humanity. Lives lost from both sides, Israel and Palestine, which we condemned. But where's the atrocities that were meted against civilians by a government with a determination to annihilate a nation? If you remember the messages that came, not only from ordinary ordinary civilians in Israel, but from the government, it actually meant this is a crime against humanity. It affirmed our position. Of course, we're not a monolithic organization. Debates were very tense. Engagements, options were considered. But what was good was to remember where we come from as a nation. That when we reached the Boipatong peak, it took the world also to pick up phones and communicate with the apartheid government and everybody to say, you can't do this when the ANC on behalf of the people of South Africa has agreed to come and negotiate. At a point where even the South African apartheid government was highly isolated. They realized that they can no longer go beyond. So the discussions that happened was, we have protested, we have picketed. We have made deputations to many institutions. But what do we have? We have the power of being in government. Let's use that power within what exists in terms of multilateral processes. And a team of comrades had to go and study what the legal statutes say internationally. And when that actually happened, we then had 2-3 days engagements reflecting on, the different laws that exist and the different options. And when that happened, we all found a common ground that we can't just go to the UN and present again our statement, our motions and stuff. We have taken a resolution in our 55th National Conference to say we must call for the reform of multilateral institutions. The aftermath of what happened in Palestine gave us an opportunity then to enter on the multilateral platforms and not just exploit it, but affirm its existence and why it has to be objective in dealing with issues. So capable men and women of South Africa also rallied behind what the ANC had initiated after the ANC had taken the matter to government and canvassed many others in the civil society, here in South Africa. And here we are today. The memorials will actually be presented. We now are quite humbled that we have almost 9 countries that are behind what was an initiative of this organization in the south of Africa, and represented by men and women who also volunteered their service to represent the South African government on behalf of the majority, because we must also appreciate there are some in South Africa who don't support the stance that we have taken. So this is what it took. We had to meet even with comrades from Palestine across their different factions, because they are also very divided. We had to interact with them. We had to interact with the South African Jewish Board of Deputies, very intense engagements. And in all of them, we said we must continue to talk. And let's all take a stance in favor of humanity. It's not an easy thing, because other people have got privileges that are more than the privileges of the children of Palestine. And we opted to take the stance in favor of the women and children of Palestine. So the memorials, as they're going to be presented, what is also quite humbling is that South Africa has got substantial evidence. Because remember, the memorials is about expatiating on what you have presented. Records, documents, names of people, names of young women and children who are now here in South Africa. The buildings, a cathedral that has been bombed, a maternity ward that has been bombed, a group of young people who in the morning they moved on a particular direction going to school. In the afternoon, when they come back from school, they got bombed by armed Israeli soldiers, because these Israeli soldiers were saying these young school kids were confronting them and coming to fight them. In South Africa, we know, we defended ourselves with the lead of a dustbin and a brick. These young kids get killed by people who are heavily armed in tankers as they are carrying their little books coming from school. That is the kind of evidence, the evidence that shows famine, people staying over days and months without food, where deliverables were actually, humanitarian goods were not actually allowed into Gaza and into any other place where the Palestinians have sought refuge. There will be evidence of a family, a mother with 3 children, the other one a newly born baby. She gives birth. They go home, they stay at home. The father goes out to go and get a birth certificate. As the father is going to get a birth certificate, will present evidence that shows that as he went to get a birth certificate, the mother and the newly born baby and the other 2 die. The child died without a birth certificate. The only thing that the child now will have is a death certificate, and we're not sure that he will get the death certificate because it's an unknown person. But sadly enough, the father took refuge in another area. As we speak today, the father also got bombed. Isn't just that evidence of that family? Isn't that a sign of annihilation? That you want to eliminate human beings. And hence we're saying this is about humanity. And we're quite confident, because there are also other people, some we've been given support through Comrade Thabo Mbeki's foundation, of people who have studied the effects of war here in Africa, in Sudan, in Sudan and the implications around famine, the implications around diseases, the threat of polio, and so on. Which peace-loving nation can actually do what Israel is doing? We also will be presenting, and we were looking forward to the South African government being able to also recap the journey we have traveled as South Africa. Starting at the time of deputations by Comrade Aziz Pahad, may his soul rest in peace, comrades like Zola Skweyiya being put in those teams, us bringing everybody together to come and engage. And therefore, what we are going to be observing is a validation of the correct position we have taken, not on behalf of the ANC, but on behalf of humanity.
I want to talk about this blip in the map, as the Western countries would say. And we've heard what Donald Trump thinks of Africa and his language around Africa, and this might be the next president of America. But this little small country, insignificant to some, and the importance of making sure that the messaging, the attention around Gaza is not lost. How were you able to do that? Because we can't, and what you said before when you said it was October 7th and what happened after, it didn't start there.
Yeah. 1947, yeah.
Yes, it didn't start there. It actually started in the 40s. And you can't take that away. Would that be part of the evidence that, firstly, you present, that this is not only something that happened during that particular time where Hamas came into Israel, invaded Israel and, killed people and took some hostages, but this is something that has been maturing and simmering for a number of years and decades.
It will be a presentation of the history of the people of Palestine and what they have been going through. Not even 48, 47. And it happened at a time when the ANC was already formed. So the ANC has got that rich knowledge, that rich appreciation of the struggles of colonization in the world, and the struggles of forced removals, and would also be able to also show the contradictions around the multilateral bodies, including the United Nations. Those contradictions would also be coming out. Because when we sit in a conference in the ANC, we sit in a conference to shape the future. And our deliberations about promotion of a multipolar world against a unipolar world is based on our personal experience as a nation, but also on the basis of what we have seen, even with Palestine, with Western Sahara, with Cuba. Now we have problems in Sudan, with problems across. And we will be able also, amongst others, not to hear a presentation that is informed solely by legal interpretation of genocide and crime against humanity, as I've said. There will be additional submissions that come from scientists, that come from people who are in the health sector, that come from experiences of gift of the givers that we must be very proud of as a nation and be grateful of. It will be coming from the global anti-apartheid movement's experiences, Babu Frank Chikani, because again, we have a very rich experience of a global anti-apartheid movement that rallied behind the African National Congress and the people of South Africa. It's our time now to also do it. So we've got that is going to also show evidence. And we're quite happy that our government has also gone out to receive information from many other international bodies that substantiate what has actually happened. So that little blip, that little dot in the corner, in the bottom of Africa, is something that we must never underestimate. We're a nation of warriors. I think we've fought so many wars of resistance in different forms as a nation. We also have somebody that now the world claims as a world icon. Somebody from Kunu. Today is called the world icon. There is something in the seed that was planted here. And that is what the world now knows. You go anywhere, you say, I'm from South Africa. You know, the response now, besides saying Nelson Mandela, the response says, thank you very much. Thank you very much for standing with Palestine. Even with people that you least expected. You pass through an airport, you carrying your bag, you wearing your NC t-shirt, or you putting the Yasser Arafat scarf or a Palestinian thing, people just come to you. Of course, there will be those who will just be looking at you and wanting to swear at you, but majority of people in the world, even within the United States of America, we've been there. We've met with solidarity groups. And there are many also inside Israel who are very tired of this. What we must now do is to also, as South Africa, use our own law and deal with those South Africans who are recruited by the Israel Defense Force and are actually involved in the persecution of innocent people. We've waged an armed struggle. Civilians were never our target. We waged an armed struggle. Civilians were never our target, but it was those institutions of influence and strategic institutions that would actually be the main target. Here, consciously, people go and bomb a mosque on a Friday today at 12. On a Friday at 12, people go and pray, and you go in and you bomb them. Is that really an act that can be justified? Bombing an antenatal ward. Me and you are women. You know the state of a woman under those conditions. What does it say? And then you have a head of state declaring the Secretary General of the United Nations a persona non grata. If ordinarily I was a Nomvula, I would have said something about that SG. But for us until today to not hear anybody and anything coming from the UN when Israel says the SG of the UN is a persona non grata, says a lot about the UN. Leave Netanyahu. Where is that UN Security Council? Because an attack on him, it's not on him as a person, it is also on the institution. Where are they? What are they doing? And it can't be something that is just left like that. And hence the ANC opted, and we support the government's option of buying into our proposal and mobilizing the world with 9 countries, many other institutions now coming on the side of the people of Palestine. So yes, that day of the presentation of the submissions, it's not the end of it. Remember, there will be months before. We must be able to say, people must not die of famine. There mustn't be new diseases like polio that we are now told are actually happening. Universities must not be bombed. We've got young Palestinians who have been rescued by the gift of the givers. Some are here. If they go home, they're going back to rubble. If they go home, they have no parents. They are already orphans. If they go home, they may not even reach what used to be home. They may be arrested as they enter, because there are all those stop and search sections that are managed by Israel. It's time that the United Nations Security Council and all its other bodies take over the security around that area. That's part of what we must deal with.
I want you to touch on asylum seekers in terms of the Palestinian people. But what I want to ask you is, I imagine that it was strategic to go to the ICJ as well, because you also show the hypocrisy of those institutions. And not only that, because those institutions were institutions that were created by the Western countries, which are now favoring and have vetoed any sort of votes against the ceasefire votes in the UN. But you wanted to expose that, for one, that there's hypocrisy in those institutions, but also if those institutions come with a certain outcome, those particular countries would have to abide by that outcome because they would have no choice. Did that come into...
Absolutely. As I've said, that we went to look at what other options exist, because these submissions to the UN and debates in the UN Assembly bear no fruit. What exists? Multilateral platforms. Let's go and look at what is the legal platform that we have, and it was the ICJ. And what we are now seeing is that our call for their reform is also going to be done forcefully through this process. You've seen how decisions have been taken now late, the two sessions. The second thing is the implementation of the outcomes, because you can't now have your cake and eat it. You must remain consistent with why you set it up. They were used if it is somebody from Africa or from any developing nation. Now there must be consistency in how they conduct themselves, and also in their ruling and implementation of their decisions. The third thing about this is to also show that we may not be permanent members of the United Nations Security Council, but we know how to use other levers to make interventions on security matters. Yet the UN Security Council is a boys' club that comes together, that shows male ego and domination, and nothing about fairness, nothing about justice, nothing about humanity, nothing about safety or silencing the guns, and building a new world order. Because ours is about, these were formed post the World War II. They formed these formations, they created these platforms, and here we are. Let them actually be utilized for the good of humanity. And we continue to underline the word humanity, because genocide is a crime against humanity. A mother with 3 children, a newly born baby who gets bombed in their own shelter in a village. What do you call that? Bombing of a cathedral, bombing of a mosque. Because it is also something that is important, that this Palestinian issue, it's not a religious issue. We have cathedrals, Roman Catholic cathedrals that have been bombed. We have synagogues that have been bombed, mosques that have been bombed, and as we have also said, is that what must be exposed also in these multilateral platforms is that discrimination must never be seen on the basis of the religion or ethnic group or any other form of characterization of a nation. It's not Muslims against Zionists. It's the world against genocide.
I want to I want to take it to the UNSC, but before that, I think I'm in the media space, and we can't not talk about how the media has covered this this particular travesty in Gaza. And I wonder if you could touch on that, your own observation as the ANC, and how Western media and the Times, we've been found to be at fault as well as South African media, and how we've presented the case of the people of Palestine, their struggles, the people of Palestine. And does this then form part of the arguments in that the world has been so desensitized and we've muddied how the world looks at the struggles of the people of Palestine, not only since October 7th, but even before then? Speak to me about the media.
Look, we must appreciate that we now live in the era of social media and stuff. The bigger part of evidence with regard to what is happening in Palestine has not come through formal media platforms. Not at all.
That is sad.
And that on its own, without saying everybody, but the media in its own nature thought that it must stand on the side of those that they assume are dominant, which is Israel, which is an unfortunate thing. Any information that comes from Palestine gets easily blocked. So there's no balanced, distribution of information or dissemination of information and stuff. The other unfortunate thing is that we were made to believe that what is happening now with over 40,000 people, I'm not talking about 1947, just now, over 40,000 people, it's because of what Hamas did on the 7th, which we condemn. And every time when you raise the atrocities of a dominant, arrogant government of Israel, some in the media, most in the media, would actually say, but it's Hamas that started. You must deal with Hamas. We were in this country fighting against an apartheid system, defending ourselves with petrol bombs, defending ourselves with bricks, and our shield being a lid of a dustbin. What we did was against a system that is highly resourced, a system that is in power, and a system that suppresses people. And therefore, you can't then equate what the liberation movement, the ANC, did against what apartheid did. The same as I'm saying now about the situation in Israel. The media has not been fair, has not been good. And also there's been this fear tactic about the might of Israel. This fear tactic that instill fear, show that they are powerful, rather than saying, with your power, humble yourself and listen to others. You've invaded their land. You've imposed yourself on them. No one writes that story, the recap as to how did we find ourselves here. And therefore the narrative disappears. And I think the media partly has to blame. Even here in South Africa, you raise the issue of Palestine and people will tell you, no, but people are dying in South Africa. And indeed, people are dying in South Africa. But the very fact that today you can speak out against a Cyril Ramaphosa who's a president and go to bed without being arrested or killed, it's a freedom we want for the children of Palestine. They can't express themselves. The media the Palestinian media institutions have been eroded. I'm yet to hear one media house that will say, we want to bring all these Palestinian people, let's support you to say your side of the story. It hasn't happened. We've had progressive journalists and progressive media houses during our times of struggle, including international. You ended up with the Reuters and them here. Actually, we're covered more by Reuters and many other people in terms of positive reporting. Patriots now who are in the media space don't actually say it's our time also to give other people the platform to tell their story.
Your political affiliations towards PLO?
Yes. No, thank you very much. I think that's a very important matter you are bringing. Historically, the relations have been with the PLO, led by Comrade Yasser Arafat. We also know that there was an authority that was established in Palestine, the Palestinian Authority. We know that there are many fragmented organizations, including Hezbollah and everybody, including Hamas, in the space of the Palestinian cause. We also must remember that the very Hamas was a formation that was made to counter the PLO and also in the guise of multi-party democracy and so forth. And that was also allowed. As we have seen here in South Africa, many formations are created by external forces here in our country. That's what happened. And of course, they won. They ran a particular section of Palestine. And of course, they've failed now to carry the message of the messenger, the message of the handler, the message of those that created them. They now have become a problem to them. We can't enter that space because firstly, they are Palestinian. So our relationship with them has got nothing to do with who they are, what they stand for. We support them as we support the cause of Palestinians, but our strategic partner has remained what everybody know, the friendship, the relationship, the support by the Palestinians, by the way, under Comrade Yasser Arafat, to the struggles of the people of South Africa and the people of the world has always been with the PLO of Palestine. So, hence we are saying one thing that we have learned in our own cause. You may be the ANC bigger than all other parties, but for you to find a solution, you need to unite as South Africans. So the unity of Palestinians is very important. And that's why last we hosted them, our president hosted them in Luthuli House, all the formations, to say, guys, there's a need for all of you to unite. Two, there's a need to have a common plan. We will never give up on doing that. That there must be a plan. What happens after tomorrow? Just as we saw Comrade Oliver Tambo, who will be celebrating in a few days' time, crisscrossing the world. After what President Chief Albert Luthuli made deputations to the Queen and everybody and stuff, Abu Babu Makatini in the United Nations, OR went out and we came out with what was called the Harare Declaration. We need that, and that's part of the work that we are also working quietly on with comrades from Palestine, of course supported also by the global anti-apartheid movement for Palestine. We also are bringing some of the foundations in South Africa to talk to them. But finally, the future of Palestine has to be shaped by the Palestinians. So we come in to lend a hand, as we are doing with Sudan, as we are doing with many others where there is strife and conflict. So that's where we are. Nobody must want us to condemn the existence of Hamas, which is their creation, thinking they are undermining PLO. Just as we have here in this country formations that were made to undermine the African National Congress. But when we have a national duty to unite the people of South Africa, we talk to everybody, as we have done with the establishment of the GNU, because it's in the interest of a country. So our life experience is what informs us that albeit who we have a historical tie with, they themselves must find each other.
I want to finish off around Israel's war on the people of Palestine and talk about, perhaps you might give me an understanding, ma'am, because in as much as there's conflict in several parts of the globe, including Africa, Sudan, Western Sahara, which is very close to your heart as well, but nothing pulls at our heartstrings like what's going on in Palestine. Perhaps, can you give me an understanding as to why in South Africa, where, for instance, someone could say, but the same is happening in Sudan. People are dying. Famine exists there. But why does this one pull at our heartstrings? And I was asking several people, and they all had their own theories that maybe because we were colonized in a similar way and we're colonized by the same people. What's your perspective?
Yeah, it's no struggle or plight of any nation is more important than the other. The situation of Palestine, as I've said, happened at a time when we also had our own issues around the 40s. And therefore, in our reflection around the geopolitics, Palestine has always been matching, pound for pound with our situation, learning from them supporting us, and them learning from us. And hence what Madiba said. That statement by Madiba about the freedom of South Africa is incomplete without the freedom of Palestine had to do with the moment of intensified exploitation by our colonizers, as well as the intensification of colonization and encroachment of Palestine. So there is that historical connection. And therefore, both tactically and strategically, the NC cannot find it easy to now say, let's pause. Somebody said, hey, these people are so far from you, Ningenapi. How do you... You have to explain both in terms of the strategic reason of us standing with Palestine around all forms of colonization, our own historical experiences about colonization of a special type, the same as with the Palestinians. We have to also deal with the issues that have to do with the use of force and crimes against humanity. Israel is the only place where a definition of what an apartheid system is so similar to that of ours. And in fact, yesterday I was saying to somebody, they actually look like they are worse than even the South African apartheid system.
I want to go to the BRICS summit. There's currently which is taking place. I recently wrote a story just analyzing what would be discussed, and I was of the view that it's likely that we will talk about another expansion, which would include probably countries like Venezuela. We know Mr. Lula da Silva is obviously against that. It would also talk about de-dollarization. It will talk about the UNSC, and likely we will talk about Gaza as well as the Russian war in Ukraine. But I want to start with de-dollarization. It's a topic that fueled conversation when you, as South Africa, hosted the BRICS summit last year. You held a particular view, and I think the African continent holds that particular view that, we should look beyond having just one particular, having the dollar as our only means of trading. And Russia has been championing this for a number of years. Your belief in how South Africa's strategy going into these conversations at this BRICS summit, what would it look like?
Well, the issue of de-dollarization or promotion of diverse forms of trading amongst partners is something that is also linked to us promoting a multipolar world. Because in a multipolar world, you can't then have one form of trading or a currency that influences relationships to an extent where it becomes unaffordable to trade amongst equals, because they can trade on the basis of what they are capable to trade on, but have to be all dependent on this. And therefore, it does not also mean we have to do away with the dollar, where you have to trade using the dollar, deal with that in the space where the dollar belongs, and be able to deal with you as a BRICS community, you as the African community, in the form that will make things cheaper, that will make the value of the returns good for the trading partners. And we also believe that with all these sanctions that are imposed by one country against the other, there is no fairness. We would love to trade with those countries that sanctions have been applied against, who can't now trade with the dollar. And yet they've got goods and they've got opportunities to survive. And you also have nations that require the goods and services. We can't all now find it difficult not to trade. BRICS now is working on the BRICS Development Bank. Of course, if America is not part of BRICS, why must then be the dollar be the determining factor on how we are going to relate? If China has to trade with America, they must sort their own trade, the yuan and the dollar that side. South Africa, because the US is our biggest trading partner. But it can't remain the biggest trading partner by suppressing others from trading with us. So there has to be that balancing, because they also need us. So we need each other. So there must be that appreciation. So we support that interaction without doing away with any other form of trading, with any other existing arrangement. But it can be a determinating form of trading, because it is a dollar. There must be something else, then there must be many. We want to trade with Cuba. There are no sanctions against Cuba by the UN, by the way. We want to trade with Venezuela. There are no sanctions imposed by the UN. We want to trade with Iran. There are no sanctions imposed against Iran by the UN. We've not supported that. There are now sanctions against Russia. Why should the world suffer, and why should nations of those countries suffer because one country somewhere decides that it will actually have a veto power? Actually, it becomes their United Nations, not a United States. It can't be correct. So these discussions are very important. They are very important in terms of moving forward, even for the Africa Trade Agreement. Because how are we going to be relating when we have all these kind of problems that are there? We also are quite excited that the BRICS Plus initiative is a product of South Africa. It happened when we were chairing BRICS here in Johannesburg. And we have a number of new family members in the BRICS community.
Very powerful family members.
Very powerful family. That's exactly. Our relatives are big now, So
in the oil.
But we can't even use that opportunity because of all these trade policies, foreign policies and stuff. So we need to look at that. The next thing that for us is important is how we use different multilateral platforms such as BRICS to influence what happens in the UN, to influence what happens in Africa. Because what we must also be conscious of is that our own continent is not stable. And therefore, The fact that South Africa took many in Africa to BRICS, and some are also part of the BRICS meeting now taking place in Kazan. It's about us affirming the importance again of building strong regional blocks. Strong regional blocks, and also going there as a united continent that will then strengthen the African Union. The third thing that is going to be quite interesting there, it's around peace. The Ukraine-Russia conflict, it has to come to an end. To Palestine and Israel, I think we've reached a turning point. I'm saying it has to happen in our lifetime. What else will you do if you have reached a point where you've gone to the courts, you've brought evidence? Who else must stand against it? It can't be America and Israel. It just can't be. The people of Western Sahara, the dominance of Morocco using its money to buy people and to undermine the sovereignty of nations, it's something that we must also look at. The last thing, and I think we have a retreat of the ANC around the foreign policy in a few weeks' time. One of the things I will be putting there, that's Nomvula now. What is happening in Mali, in Niger, those takeovers. Of course, we must never allow a hostile takeover of a legitimately elected government.
Why do I think you're going to sound like Julius now?
But the thing that I've not even heard him. I don't listen to Julius. So the thing that I want to say is that what happened? Again, the South African media must help, because everybody just talk about the militia taking over, the army generals taking over.
What you mean is
but for me,
the French and the interference.
The incomplete struggle for decolonization, because that's exactly the thing. A very stubborn face around economic freedom. That's the struggle in that corner. We must look at it. We must, and I'm saying it's Nomvula. It has not been ventilated in the ANC, but looking at that, for me, that is exactly what we must reflect on. We must not allow others coming outside of this continent to be the first to provide the solutions there. And therefore, the AU must come in. Of course, they've pulled out of the ECOWAS, but what we can't afford is a situation where external parties and individuals and countries become their go-to when we are there. And I'm one person who's saying we need to establish contact. We need to listen to them. We must hear their side of the story. The problems in the DRC are the same. We must be able to, we must contextualize what is happening there. We know what was happening in one part of Mozambique just now recently. We must deal with that. The Sudan issue, it's time that we must just push to a point where we now tell the honest truth. Economic emancipation in the former colonized countries is the most complex and most difficult struggle, which can be distorted by those who want to keep those nations continuously exploited through their rich minerals. And that's the plight of some of these African countries. From the ANC, I do believe that we have a responsibility. From civil society, we have a responsibility. And thanks to the Thabo Mbeki Foundation on bringing the Sudan issue and hosting again, the third time here in South Africa, just a few weeks ago, and bringing all of the parties. It's that we must do in Palestine. It's that we must do in East Africa. It's that we must do across this region. The SG will be hosting a meeting of former liberation movements now in November. And amongst other things, we're looking at the phase for economic freedom. Where are we?